I caught my wife in bed with another man. I couldn't control myself, and now I'm in prison. My name's Carson, and I'm 31 years old. I never thought my life would end up like this. If you had told me a year ago that I'd be sitting in a prison cell, looking back at the moment that destroyed everything, I would have laughed in your face. But here I am, and it all started on a regular Tuesday afternoon. I had left work early that day. I wasn't feeling great, had a headache that wouldn't go away, and just wanted to lie down for a bit. I remember thinking that I'd surprise my wife, Sarah. We had been married for 5 years, and things between us had been, well, they weren't perfect. But I still loved her. I thought she loved me too. As I parked my car in the driveway, I noticed something strange. A car I didn't recognize. It was a small, dark sedan, nothing fancy. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was someone visiting Sarah, maybe a friend. But then, a knot formed in my stomach. Something felt off, but I didn't know why. I stepped out of the car and slowly made my way to the front door. My heart started racing, and the closer I got to the house, the more I felt like something was wrong. I opened the door, quietly as I could. The house was silent, except for the faint sound of music coming from upstairs. It wasn't loud, just soft enough to be in the background, but it was enough to put me on edge. I called out her name, Sarah? No response. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps suddenly feeling heavier, the air thicker. As I approached the stairs, my mind was running wild. I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe she was just watching TV in bed or reading a book. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I reached the top of the stairs, and that's when I heard it. Voices. 2 voices. One of them was hers. The other was a man's. I froze. For a moment, I couldn't move. My whole body went cold, and my heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe it. But the voices were real, and they were coming from our bedroom. I don't know why, but I kept walking. My feet carried me forward, even though every part of me wanted to turn back and pretend I hadn't heard anything. But it was too late. When I reached the bedroom door, it was half open. I pushed it gently, and there they were. Sarah was in bed with another man. I didn't know him. He was just some guy, lying there, as if he belonged there, as if he was in my place. Time seemed to stop. I couldn't hear the music anymore, couldn't hear anything but the blood rushing in my ears. My vision blurred, and for a second I thought I was going to pass out. But instead, I stood there, rooted to the spot, watching as the woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, betrayed me in the worst way possible. They hadn't noticed me yet. Sarah was laughing, smiling, like she didn't have a care in the world, like I didn't even exist. I don't remember walking into the room, but suddenly I was there, standing at the foot of the bed. The man noticed me first. His eyes went wide, and he jumped up, scrambling for his clothes. Sarah saw me a second later. Her face changed from shock to fear in an instant. "Carson," she gasped, pulling the sheets around her. "It's not what it looks like." Not what it looks like. That phrase echoed in my head, over and over. What else could it be? I had just caught my wife in bed with another man. I could feel something inside me breaking. My chest hurt, and I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to yell at both of them, to demand answers. But all I could manage was a single word. "Why?" Sarah didn't answer. She just sat there, staring at me, her face pale. The guy, whoever he was, grabbed his shirt and bolted past me, muttering something about not wanting any trouble. I barely noticed him leave. I kept looking at her, waiting for her to say something, anything that would explain why this was happening. But she didn't. She just started crying, and all I could do was stand there, feeling more lost and broken than I had ever felt in my entire life. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to leave, to just walk out and never come back. But another part of me, the part that had loved her for so long, wanted to stay. Wanted to hear her tell me that this was some kind of mistake, that she still loved me. But she didn't say that. She didn't say anything. After what felt like an eternity, I finally turned and walked out of the room. I didn't look back. I couldn't. When I reached the front door, I stopped and looked around the house, our home. The place where we had built a life together. Now it felt like a stranger's house, like everything I thought I knew was a lie. I walked out the door and got into my car, but I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, my hands shaking, my heart shattered into a million pieces. Everything had changed, and there was no going back. I don't remember driving. I don't remember anything about the streets, the cars, or even how long I was on the road. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles had turned white. My mind was a storm of emotions: hurt, betrayal, and something else I hadn't felt before. Rage. When I finally stopped the car, I was parked at a gas station a few miles from the house. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring blankly at the world around me. People came and went, filling up their cars, going about their lives like nothing had changed. But for me, everything was different. My world had collapsed in a single moment, and now all I could feel was the anger boiling up inside me. I knew I couldn't just sit there. I had to go back. I needed answers. I needed to confront Sarah, to make her explain what she had done. The more I thought about it, the more furious I became. How could she do this to me? To us? We had built a life together, and she threw it all away for some random guy. I turned the key in the ignition and drove back to the house. My mind was racing, replaying the scene over and over again. The two of them in bed, her laughing, his stupid face when he saw me. I gripped the steering wheel harder, my teeth clenched. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, my heart pounding so fast I thought it might explode. When I pulled into the driveway, the other guy's car was gone. But I didn't care about him. He wasn't my problem anymore. It was Sarah. She was the one who betrayed me. I slammed the car door and stormed into the house. The door banged against the wall as I entered, and I heard her moving around upstairs. She hadn't left. Of course she hadn't. She was probably sitting there, waiting for me to calm down, thinking I'd just let it go. But I wasn't calm. I was far from calm. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my blood boiling with every step. When I reached the bedroom, she was standing by the window, fully dressed now, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. "Carson," she started, but I didn't let her finish. "Shut up," I snapped, my voice harsher than I had ever heard it before. "Just shut up." She flinched at my tone, but I didn't care. I couldn't hold it in anymore. The rage that had been building inside me erupted. "What the hell were you thinking?" I yelled, my voice echoing in the room. "How could you do this to me, to us?" Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face. For a second I thought I saw regret in her eyes, but it didn't matter. It was too late for regret. The damage was done. "I trusted you," I shouted, my fists clenched at my sides. "I loved you, Sarah, and this is how you repay me?" She tried to step closer, but I backed away, shaking my head. I couldn't let her get close. I couldn't let her touch me, not after what she had done. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "It just happened." "It just happened?" I repeated, incredulous. My mind couldn't process the words. "That's your excuse? It just happened?" I felt the anger surge through me again, more powerful than before. My vision blurred, and all I could see was red. Before I knew what I was doing, my fist was flying through the air. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I just reacted. The sound of my knuckles connecting with her face was deafening. She cried out and stumbled back, holding her cheek. Her eyes were wide with shock, and for a moment, everything went silent. The world around me froze, and all I could hear was the pounding of my heart in my ears. I stood there, breathing heavily, my hand throbbing from the impact. I couldn't believe what I had done. I had hit her. I had actually hit her. Sarah looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and disbelief. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The look on her face said it all. I backed away, suddenly feeling sick to my stomach. What had I done? This wasn't me. I wasn't the kind of person who hit people, let alone the woman I loved. But the rage had taken over, and now it was too late to take it back. "Carson," she whispered again, her voice trembling. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't face what I had just done. Without another word, I turned and left the room. My feet felt heavy as I walked down the stairs, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't control. I stumbled through the front door, barely able to breathe, and collapsed onto the porch, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I stared at them, at the hand that had struck her. My chest tightened, and for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt something other than anger. I felt shame. I had let my emotions take control. I had let the rage consume me, and now everything was worse than before. I didn't know what to do. My heart was broken, my mind was spinning, and all I could feel was the weight of my actions pressing down on me, suffocating me. Sitting there on the porch, I realized I had crossed a line. There was no coming back from this. Everything had spiraled out of control, and I didn't know how to fix it, or if it even could be fixed. I sat on the porch, my back against the wall, trying to catch my breath. My hands were still shaking, and the cold air did nothing to calm me down. The adrenaline was starting to fade, and with it came a heavy, sinking feeling in my chest. I replayed the moment over and over in my head, how my fist had connected with Sarah's face, the look of shock and fear in her eyes. I couldn't believe I'd done it. I couldn't believe I had let myself lose control like that. The anger was gone now, replaced by guilt, by shame. I felt sick to my stomach, my thoughts racing. I wanted to go back inside, to apologize, to tell her I didn't mean it, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, stuck in that moment, replaying my mistake over and over again. It wasn't supposed to end like this. We were supposed to talk it out, to figure out what had gone wrong. But now I had ruined everything. I had crossed a line that I couldn't uncross, and I knew it. Then I heard it, the faint sound of sirens in the distance. My heart sank. At first I thought it was just a coincidence, that maybe the police were on their way to something else. But as the sound grew louder, I knew they were coming for me. I didn't move. I couldn't. Part of me thought about running, about getting into my car and driving as far away as I could. But what was the point? There was no escaping what I had done. Within minutes, the police car pulled into the driveway. The lights flashed, casting blue and red across the front yard, and 2 officers stepped out. They moved quickly, their expressions serious. I felt like I was watching it all from a distance, like it wasn't really happening to me. But it was. One of the officers, a tall man with a stern face, approached me. His partner went inside the house. I heard Sarah's voice, faint but clear, and my heart sank further. She was talking to them, telling them what I had done. And she was right. I deserved this. "Carson Smith?" the officer asked, his voice calm but firm. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. My throat was tight, and I felt like I might throw up. The officer crouched down in front of me, his eyes scanning my face. "We received a call about a domestic disturbance. We need to ask you a few questions." I didn't say anything. What could I say? The evidence was clear. My knuckles were red, still sore from the punch, and Sarah's face was probably bruised. There was no denying what had happened. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked, his voice softer now, like he was trying to give me a chance to explain myself. But there was nothing to explain. I looked down at my hands, ashamed. I hit her," I finally whispered. The words felt heavy, like they didn't belong to me, but I knew they were mine. The officer nodded slowly, then stood up. "All right, Carson, I'm gonna need you to stand up and turn around." I knew what was coming next, but it still hit me hard when I felt the cold metal of the handcuffs around my wrists. The click of the cuffs was like a final, crushing blow. I had gone too far, and now I had to face the consequences. As the officer led me to the car, I caught a glimpse of Sarah standing in the doorway. Her arms were wrapped around herself, and she was talking to the other officer. She wasn't crying anymore, but her face was pale, and I could see the bruise starting to form on her cheek. My stomach twisted with guilt. I wanted to say something to her, to apologize, to beg her to forgive me. But the words wouldn't come. All I could do was stare at her as the officer pushed me into the back of the car and closed the door. The drive to the station was silent. I stared out the window, watching the world pass by in a blur. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Just a few hours ago, my life had seemed normal, or at least close to normal. And now, everything had fallen apart. When we arrived at the station, the officers led me inside. The lights were harsh, the air cold. They took my fingerprints, my mugshot, and asked me more questions. I answered them all in a daze, barely processing what I was saying. Sitting in the holding cell, I had nothing but time to think, time to replay every moment that had led me here. The discovery, the rage, the punch, it all played out like a nightmare, but it was real. I had done this. I had let my anger destroy everything. The cell was cold, the walls blank and unforgiving. I could hear the sounds of other people being processed, voices echoing down the hall, but I felt completely alone. I wanted to go back in time, to take it all back, but I knew it was impossible. I had to live with what I'd done. I kept thinking about Sarah, about the look in her eyes when I hit her. It wasn't just pain. It was something deeper. Betrayal. Fear. And I had caused that. I had become the monster I never thought I could be. Hours passed, though it felt like days. Eventually, an officer came to the cell and told me I'd be allowed a phone call. I didn't know who to call. My parents? They'd be ashamed of me. A lawyer? I didn't have one. In the end, I didn't call anyone. I just sat there, staring at the floor, thinking about how my life had fallen apart in a matter of hours. And how it was my fault. The realization hit me hard. I wasn't just here because of Sarah's betrayal. I was here because I couldn't control myself. Because I let my anger destroy everything I cared about. Now, I had to live with that. The courtroom was colder than I expected. I sat there in silence, wearing the same plain prison uniform I'd been in for weeks. My hands were clasped together, wrists sore from the handcuffs that dug into my skin every time I moved. The judge's bench seemed impossibly high, and every eye in the room felt like it was on me. I kept my head down, avoiding their stares. The trial had been quick. I had no defense, no excuses for what I did. The evidence was clear. I hit Sarah, and I wasn't going to deny it. I had confessed to everything the night I was arrested, and now I was facing the consequences. The prosecutor spoke, painting a picture of me as a man who couldn't control his temper, a man who let his anger turn into violence. And he wasn't wrong. I had let my rage take over. I had hit my wife, the person I was supposed to protect. The guilt of that weighed on me every second, like a boulder pressing on my chest. My lawyer tried to argue that it was a moment of weakness, a mistake that I deeply regretted. He spoke about my clean record, about how I'd never been violent before, how this was completely out of character. But none of that mattered, not to the judge, and definitely not to Sarah. She sat on the other side of the room, her face blank, cold. She hadn't said a word to me since that night. I'd seen her during the trial, but every time our eyes met, she looked away, as if I didn't exist. I knew she hated me. I could see it in the way she held herself, the way she refused to even glance in my direction. And I couldn't blame her. Mia was there too, Sarah's sister. She had always been protective of Sarah, and now her anger toward me was clear. The way she glared at me, like I was the worst kind of person, made my skin crawl. Mia didn't just hate me, she despised me. I could feel the intensity of it every time I looked in her direction. The judge finally spoke, his voice stern and direct. "Carson Smith, you have pleaded guilty to the charge of domestic assault. After reviewing the evidence and hearing both sides, this court sentences you to 1 year in prison." 1 year. I knew it could have been worse. The judge could have given me more time, and part of me felt like I deserved it. Still, hearing the words made my stomach drop. 1 year of my life? Gone. 1 year away from everything I knew. But maybe that's what I needed. Time to think about what I had done. Time to sit with the shame that I carried every day. The judge banged his gavel, and just like that, it was over. My life, my freedom, everything, taken from me in a matter of seconds. The courtroom started to empty, but I stayed in my seat, too numb to move. As the guards came to take me back to the holding cell, I caught one last look at Sarah. She was standing up, gathering her things, talking quietly to Mia. I wanted to say something, anything, but I didn't. What could I say? Sorry? That word felt too small for what I had done. And even if I said it, would she believe me? Would it change anything? No, it was too late for apologies. As they led me away, I heard Mia's voice behind me, low but sharp. "You got what you deserved, Carson." Her words cut through me like a knife, but I kept walking. I had no right to respond. She was right. I did deserve this. Back in the cell, I sat on the hard bench, staring at the gray walls that had become my new reality. The trial was over, the sentence was given, and now I had nothing to do but wait. 1 year, it sounded like a lifetime. The memories of that night kept flashing in my mind, no matter how much I tried to push them away. I could still see the look on Sarah's face when I hit her. The shock, the fear, the pain. I could hear her voice, shaky and broken, telling the police what I'd done. And I could still feel the shame, like a weight pressing down on me, heavier with each passing day. In the quiet of the cell, it was impossible to escape it. I had hurt the person I loved most in the world, and now I was paying for it. But it wasn't the prison sentence that hurt the most. It was the knowledge that I had destroyed something that could never be fixed. A week after the trial, I got a letter from Sarah. It was short, just a few sentences, but the words hit me like a punch to the gut. Carson, I can't forgive you for what you did. I don't think I'll ever be able to. I need to move on with my life, and I think you do too. I hope you get the help you need, but I don't want to hear from you again. Please don't contact me. I read it over and over, each time feeling the finality of her words sink in deeper. She was done with me. And I didn't blame her. I folded the letter and tucked it away in my bunk. I sat there for hours, staring at the wall, wondering how things had gotten so bad. How had I let my anger take everything from me? I didn't have an answer, and maybe I never would. But I knew one thing for sure. When I finally got out of this place, I would have to live with what I had done. Every single day. Prison was a world I never thought I'd experience, but here I was, day after day, surrounded by concrete walls and steel bars. At first, I couldn't accept it. I spent the early days counting the hours, waiting for the time to pass, feeling trapped not just by the physical bars, but by the weight of my actions. Every night, I lay in my cell thinking about Sarah, about what I had done, and about how I had ended up here. The routine in prison was the same every day. Wake up early, eat bland food, work in the yard, and then go back to my cell. I didn't talk much to anyone. The other inmates had their own lives, their own stories, and I wasn't interested in making friends. I was still too lost in my own head, trying to make sense of everything. But as the weeks passed, something began to shift. Slowly, I started to understand that sitting around, feeling sorry for myself, wasn't going to change anything. I had made my choices, and now I had to live with them. The guilt wasn't going to disappear, but I could either let it destroy me, or I could try to find a way to live with it. There was a counselor who came to the prison once a week. At first, I avoided him. The last thing I wanted was to talk about my feelings with a stranger. But one day, as I sat in the yard, watching the others walk in circles around the track, I realized I couldn't keep everything bottled up anymore. I was suffocating under the weight of my own thoughts. So I signed up for a session. I didn't expect much, but something about sitting in that small, quiet room with the counselor made me open up. He didn't judge me. He didn't tell me what I already knew, that I had ruined my life and hurt the person I loved. Instead, he asked me about my anger, about the moment I lost control, and how I could make sure it never happened again. At first, I didn't have answers. I didn't know why I had let my anger take over. But as we talked more, I started to realize that it wasn't just about that one moment. It was about everything leading up to it. The frustration, the feeling of being trapped, the way I ignored all the warning signs that things were falling apart. I had let myself get to a place where I was out of control. And in that moment, I had done the unforgivable. The sessions became a regular part of my routine, and slowly, I began to feel a little less lost. I wasn't looking for forgiveness, not from Sarah, not from anyone. But I knew that if I wanted to survive this year in prison, I had to find some way to deal with the guilt and shame. I started reading a lot. The prison library wasn't much, but it had enough to keep me occupied. I found books about anger management, about self-control, about how to rebuild your life after making terrible mistakes. Some days, it felt like the words were speaking directly to me, reminding me that even though I couldn't undo the past, I could still try to be a better person. I also began writing letters, not to Sarah, but to myself. I wrote about my regrets, about the things I wished I could say to her, and about the pain I had caused. It was my way of getting everything out, of processing the storm of emotions that still haunted me. Those letters were never meant to be sent. They were just for me, a way to sort through the chaos in my head. As the months went by, I started to notice small changes in myself. The anger that had once consumed me began to fade, replaced by a kind of quiet acceptance. I couldn't change the past, but I could try to learn from it. I could try to make sure that when I got out of this place, I wouldn't be the same man who had walked in. I found purpose in small things, helping out in the prison kitchen, mentoring a younger inmate who was struggling with his own anger issues, and volunteering for any job that needed to be done. It wasn't much, but it gave me a sense of responsibility, something to focus on other than my guilt. Redemption, I learned, wasn't about being forgiven. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about owning up to what I had done and finding a way to move forward, even when it seemed impossible. The day I was released, I didn't feel like a free man. I knew that the mistakes I had made would follow me for the rest of my life. But I had spent that year in prison learning to live with the weight of those mistakes, and I was determined not to let them define me forever. I walked out of those prison gates with no real plan for the future, no idea what my life would look like now. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a small glimmer of hope. I wasn't the same person who had let his anger destroy everything. I had changed, even if only a little. Redemption wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one that I knew would take the rest of my life. And though I had a long way to go, I was finally ready to take that first step. With nothing but the clothes on my back and a year's worth of hard-earned lessons, I walked away from the prison, determined to find a new purpose. It wouldn't be easy, and I knew I'd still have to face the consequences of my actions every day. But I was ready to try. That's all I could do, keep trying. One day at a time. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next video. See you next time.